Welcome everyone to our last session. And we were just saying there before everyone came in, it's hard to believe that is, what is it, nearly, I suppose, 6 weeks from we started, but hopefully you have enjoyed it. For anybody who is new here today, my name is Catriona and I am a can't even speak properly, a professional photographer based near Dungannon in County Tyrone, and you can find me online on my socials. As Jenny mentioned, this has been recorded, so if you're watching it and catch up, you can pause it at any time if you want to follow any of the links or take down some notes and rewatch it again, obviously. So my photography business is Divine Photography, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram here. My photography training arm of the business is the Photo Academy NI, and you can find me again on Facebook and Instagram here. And then if you haven't already signed up to our free 52-week photography challenge, you can do so on this link. It's a great way of keeping in touch. And I know this is the final week, so I know some people have already signed up, and it's been lovely to meet you and see your images coming into the challenge. But if you haven't already done so, why not join in? And yeah, it's a great way of getting in regular practice. So this week, I'm just going to move that. Minimize that down a wee bit. We're going to talk about how you can photograph the Northern Lights, and this is for cameras and for smartphones. So we're going to start off with the bit about cameras, and then we'll cover smartphones. So don't think that it's just purely for cameras. To be perfectly honest, my first memory of seeing the Northern Lights was, I think I must have been about 17 or 18, and I had never heard of them. And I had been out for an evening and I was driving home, and I looked over to my right hand side and I saw this red and green glow in the sky, and I had no clue. It actually scared me a bit, so I came home and I asked my mum, and she told me what she called it. They called it the Aurora Borealis, and I thought, what an under goodness is that? So didn't really think much more of it, to be honest, because it didn't seem to be very commonplace, or you wouldn't see it that often here. So it's called the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. And I probably became more aware of it maybe 15 years ago and 20 years ago, and it was on my bucket list of things to go and see. And I suppose the place that you would synonymously associate it with was maybe Iceland or Norway. And that was on my bucket list. But in 2023, I was lucky enough to see it here for the first time. There was quite a big display, if anyone remembers it. I think it was around February time in 2023. And excuse me, since then I have been addicted. So what we're going to cover today, I'm just going to start off with a wee bit about what the Northern Lights actually are, and then how you can capture them, and just some tips for taking photographs of them, and places where you can, if you have that interest, where you can go online, and you can also download some apps on your phone, which are a great way of being notified or just going in and checking yourself. The one thing I would say is, because over the past 2 years, it has seemed to be more visible here, or maybe it's just that more people are aware of it, and now with social media and the likes of TikTok and Instagram Reels, that people see it more often. There's quite a real interest in it. So you will see these attention grabbing headlines on some of the newspapers like the Daily Mail or whatever, saying, oh, you're going to see the Northern Lights tonight. It's not just down to one factor. There's a number of different factors which come together to make sure that there's a possibility of us seeing it where we are based here. So I'm going to cover those as well. Yeah, I think I've covered everything there. So this was an image I took. That was only in October last year. That was down in, I was in County Tyrone here, which was one of the big displays that we had. Fantastic night. So I'll talk more about that as we go through. So what are the Northern Lights? It's a solar storm basically that takes place, and the sun emits a CME, which is called a coronal mass ejection, and that heads towards Earth. And it's sending charged solar particles that travel through space at high speeds. And then when they collide with the atoms and the molecules in our atmosphere, then they're transferred, or they show with light. And this takes place around the polar regions where the magnetic fields converge, and then they produce these, what are known as auroral ovals around the top and the bottom of the planet. That looks something like this. So that's what it would look like, just as a visual representation. And if you then download any of the apps, which I'll show you, you'll see this arc here. And then you can decide, obviously, depending on where you're watching. I'm assuming most people here are going to be the Northern Lights as opposed to the Southern Lights, which are in the Southern Hemisphere. And then over here in the top right-hand corner, you can see this is Ireland and the UK. So, and this is obviously the polar north. And then normally this will be higher up, but if it starts to move down, then this is where we have a chance to see the Northern Lights. So for them to be visible here in Ireland or in the UK, there are several space, weather and atmospheric conditions which need to align. So the Earth's magnetic field must be disturbed enough to allow the auroras to be seen in lower latitudes across the likes of Ireland and the UK. So there are a number of different components that come together. So the first thing is called BIS, which is the interplanetary magnetic field. And this needs to be, this scale needs to be in a negative number for us to see it. So this is where a lot of the times you'll see these headlines where it'll say, oh, they're going to be visible because of the other factors, but we won't see them here unless the BIS is negative, which is southward facing. So that's needs to be one of the factors that we have to see. And ideally for us to see it here, it's normally around between a 5 and a 10 or lower for us to be able to see them. And this is just to be a representation of what that will look like. So for it to be a negative number for us to see them. Then there needs to be a CME, which is the coronal mass ejection. And that is where the sun emits this burst of plasma and magnetic fields are ejected from the sun. And then it has to be facing earthward, as in towards us, for it to work. And then that's where if you have these what's known as strong CME impacts, this increases our chance of seeing it here where we are based in the UK and Ireland. Another factor then is the KP index, and this measures the geomagnetic activity on a scale from 0 to 9. So as you can see here, it needs to be down roughly around this region here for us to see it. And then the KPA, as I say, needs to be higher for us to see the aurora. So they are the factors that come together. And I actually meant to check this before I did it, but the huge solar storms that we had here, maybe May, was it May and October last year? And I think they were up here at P9, or which is G5 magnetic, what do you call it? Magnetic storm. So they were very high factors. Now, normally, for the Northern Lights, you have to look, because a lot of one of the most common questions people will ask me is, where do you see them? So you normally have to look facing north, and that's funny enough where the Northern Lights are. But the huge storms that we had last year, and in fact in May, I think it was the 10th of May, and on October time, those I was starting looking, and they were literally right overhead. They were going across the entire sky. So if the storm is strong enough, you don't even have to be necessarily looking northward. But if it's not as high a storm, then you normally look towards the northern direction to see the lights. So as the Earth rotates, then these solar flares, they interact with our gases, and then depending on some people have said to me, well, how come we get different colors? So you normally have like a magenta color and a green color. So depending on which gases interact, then you'll get different colors. So oxygen, when it interacts with them, you produce the green and the red lights, and then where there's nitrogen, it produces more purples and blues. So when the huge solar storms are here, I saw literally every color of the rainbow. There were blues, there were purples, there were yellows, which I had never seen before, pinks, and right through the whole entire spectrum. So if I'd love to know if you drop it in the comments, if anybody has seen them, for starters, or if you managed to get any images of the Northern Lights when they were on display last year. So the name Aurora Borealis then it comes from Aurora, which is the goddess of the dawn, and Borealis, which is the northern wind, and that's where the name comes from. And in the southern hemisphere, they're known as the Aurora Australis, I think it is, or Australis, because they're in the south. So this was an image I actually took. I included this one because this was on New Year's Day this year, and this was taken on my iPhone. And we'll talk a wee bit about the difference between iPhones and Android devices. So Now, my iPhone isn't the most up-to-date one, so I don't know how the more up-to-date ones are performing in terms of capturing the Northern Lights, but I don't find that my iPhone performs particularly well when I'm taking photos of the Northern Lights, but I do know that a lot of my followers, I would get them to send in photos, and if they have Android phones, they seem to be able to capture them better. But however, this was taken in January this year, just along the road. I happened to be traveling from my house over towards Cookstown, and the lights appeared, and I thought, right, pulled in safely off the road, and I just quickly, what I normally do is and people would say to me, you couldn't really see it. They can't see the Northern Lights in the sky. But as you follow them more and you start to take an interest in them, you start to see it. It's very faint in the sky. So I nearly can, obviously I'm looking at the apps and following, there's a good Facebook group, which I'll mention in a wee second, which is very accurate. And the fella who runs it is not sensationalist. He will give you a true, what would you say, perspective as to whether or not you're going to see them. So if there's any indicators in there, then I normally go out and hunt, and then your eyes can start to see just like slight shimmers even in the sky, and the more you do it, the more that you'll start to see them a bit more obviously. And then I just pulled in, took this quick snap on the phone, so it shows you can actually capture them on the phone, and what you capture with a camera or a phone will obviously be more what would you say, more obvious than what you can see with the naked eye. So factors in that impact as well, if you can see them or how visible they will be, are the moon. Because if the moon is full, like I think it's today is actually the full moon, say the aurora appeared today, because the moon is so strong, then it will wash out the aurora, which is more challenging. So you may be able to see it more faintly, but it can wash out the intensity of it, or you may not be able to see it or capture it with your phone or camera. So the best conditions are where it's a new moon or like a crescent moon, which it isn't as strong. And then the main challenge that we have here where we live is cloud cover, because if this thick clouds, you just won't see it, unfortunately, through it. And believe you me, I've spent many a night, I've maybe driven to the North Coast or to Donegal or along the Causeway Coast, thinking that I might see it, and clouds come in and it scuppers your chances of seeing it. This image I took, that was in October. It wasn't the night of the big display. It was around that same time though. This was up at the North Coast, and there had been heavy cloud, and thankfully it managed to split for a while and caught a glimpse of the aurora. So when is the best time to see the aurora? Well, it normally takes the best place, or best time, sorry, would be between where you're coming into autumn and winter time. And obviously you need clear and cloudless skies as well. So like last year, we had them in May and October, but you can see them at different times of the year as well. November to February is normally a good time to see them, and the best time of day, this can vary, by the way. These are only guidelines, and like that image I took on my smartphone I just showed you there, that was taken around, I think, about 6:30 possibly in the evening. It wasn't that long after sunset, and it just was visible. So there's a number of factors that come together. You just have to be ready to go and be prepared if you think that the aurora is going to be visible. And then the night of the big aurora, I was out to I think I stayed out to like 4 or 5 o'clock one morning, and I didn't really want to come home, but I had to work the next day. So it just depends on the intensity of it. The best locations then, outside of where we live, as I mentioned earlier, you have the likes of Iceland, Norway, North America, and even in Russia as well. But the one thing about the aurora, it's not, because what happens if there's a big display, people will be in these Facebook groups going, where will I go tonight? Where will I see it? There's no guarantee. Just because it happens one night, it doesn't mean it's going to happen the next night. So that's why you have to keep regular checking the apps to see when it's going to be visible. Obviously, I would love to go to the likes of Iceland or Norway. I haven't been there yet, but hope to get there at some stage. But we're lucky that we have had such great displays here over the past couple of years. This was another night, I think that was the night actually of the cloud, when it split. This was up at Ballantyre Harbour, which is a lovely wee spot, and it was an image I tried to capture for a while, so I enjoyed taking that one. So the group then on Facebook that I would recommend is known as Irish Aurora Chasers, and it's, in my opinion, it's the best aurora group. I know a lot of other groups copy what John share in there, but he is on the ball. It's free to be in the group, and he does it like he's throughout the year. He's a great source of information, and it is reliable, as I mentioned, and he doesn't have these big clickbait headlines. So it's on Facebook, Irish Aurora Chasers. And there are two apps that I keep on my phone. One of them is called Aurora Watch UK. And then there's another one, which is Aurora, but it actually comes up as Aurora Forecast, I think that is. And they do a reasonable job as well about telling you if what stage the aurora is at, and how you can potentially see it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so that was my first ever image that I captured of the aurora, taken over near by Moorstone Circles. And you could actually see the pillars. They're called pillars. So the pillars of like colours go up into the sky. So you'll have the aurora, which is glowing and it moves, but then you have these pillars of light that go up into the sky, and it's pretty magical if you do see it. This was in November 23, so that was in the first year that I started capturing them, and there was quite a big display as well. And I headed out towards the Causeway Coast. I just took a chance because it was given quite bad cloud cover that night, and I took a chance and went out there and was very lucky, and it was so strong that night, the colours. And then I actually saw this other phenomenon. So this was that was actually looking probably kind of northeast, and it was very strong, but over to my right, which would have been, I suppose, maybe southwest. So sorry, southeast. I saw this other like arc of colour in the sky, and I was wondering what that was. So I took a photograph of it, and it was only afterwards when I came home that I realised there is another phenomenon known as, it's called Steve, which is quite funny because it's one of my good friend's husband, so we always keep him going about this. So it stands for Strong Thermal Emission Velocity Enhancement, and it basically is like an arc, is like a cosmic phenomenon where these superheated gases create this phenomenon. So you might see this streak of, it's normally red. And fun fact then, the name originated from an animated film called Over the Hedge by the author, sorry, Aurora photographer. And then that's where the acronym came from. So I would love to know if anybody has seen that as opposed to just the Northern Lights. So let me know in the comments. And then this was the same night, I think it was start of January. It was either the 1st or 2nd of January. I headed over towards Loch Fay direction, and this was Steve again, which was over to the right-hand side. And you can see here the moon was in the sky. So it was harder that night to capture any of the aurora because the moon was visible. So what equipment do you need then? You need a camera, preferably if you have one, that shoots in what's known as manual mode, which is where you can adjust the exposure settings yourself. And that's where you experiment with your ISO, your shutter speed, and your aperture. And I'll give you some tips in a second as to what those settings should be. And then if you have like a higher end camera, will obviously give you higher quality images, and it helps to reduce the noise, which is those wee pixels that you might see in your images. So this was one of the big aurora displays, and this was like right up on the top of the sky. It was the maddest thing I'd ever seen. It looks almost like a portal is the only way I can describe it, into another dimension. So you have the aurora, which tends to be lower down in the sky, but on the huge solar displays, it will go right arc over your head. And then there's normally, which is the only way I can describe it, it looks like a portal where all of the flares come out from. So it's pretty magical if you do get a chance to see it. The type of lens then, this is purely for cameras now, initially. So if you have a wide angle lens, then it takes in as much of the sky as possible. So that would be a focal length of between maybe 16 to 30 millimeters is perfect. But don't get too hung up if you don't have a lens that goes that wide. Some of those images that I've taken were taken at 35 millimeters, which is a separate lens that I use. And if you can get access to a lens that allows you to use what's known as wider aperture. So the aperture is a setting in the lens, or like a mechanism that can open and close to make the opening bigger or smaller. And by opening that up to a bigger size aperture opening, it's measured in a unit called f numbers or f stops, which is the unit of measurement for aperture. So if you can get that down to a lower f number of around maybe f 1.8 or f2, that's even better, because it allows more light in. And it means that you have less chance of getting camera shake when you're taking the photograph. So the images should be better. A tripod is a must, or keeping your camera or smartphone, whichever it is, steady, because you don't want any movement whenever you're taking the photograph. And if you're using the camera, spare battery or two is useful, particularly in the colder weather, because it tends to drain the battery life. If using a camera, again, you can use what's known as a camera, or sorry, a cable release or a remote trigger. And this is where you don't actually press the shutter button to take the photograph. You can use a separate device. Or the other option is I would use the timer setting on my camera. I use it for all astro or nighttime or northern lights photography. It just means that you're not moving the camera physically at all, even by touching the button when you're taking the photograph, which means you have sharper images. And I would normally set the timer to around 2 seconds, just because you don't need it any longer. And for any of my astrophotography and aurora photography, I bring along like a torch, and I also have like a head torch. I probably use the head torch more so, and preferably if you can get one that emits, that you can alternate between white light and red light. So red light then obviously doesn't interfere with how the images turn out at all, and you can still see in the dark. So it really does make a big difference. And this was one of the images here I took on the first aurora display. Not the most fantastic foreground in the photograph, but I just stopped along the road because I was so afraid of it disappearing, because the aurora might come, but then it might not stay. So I just pulled over safely at the side of the road and took this quickly on the camera. But these literally were the colors that you could see. It had every color of the rainbow. It was spectacular. Oh, sorry. We'll move on to the settings then that you should use. So what I will say is these are just general settings. A bit like with all photography, there is no magic formula, but this is where I normally recommend, because I get a lot of people ask me what settings should they use. And this is a good starting point. Now, it will vary depending on the weather, on the intensity of the aurora, and where you are taking the photographs. Because ideally, you're looking for somewhere that has less light pollution, somewhere without street lights, because then you can see it, your eyes adjust better, so you can see it just with your own eyes, but also the camera doesn't get impacted, or the smartphone doesn't get impacted by artificial light pollution. I normally recommend taking a photograph in manual mode then on your camera, which is normally recommended by is represented by M on the shooting dial. And then this means you can set your shutter speed, your ISO, and your aperture setting yourself. So where I normally go to, and this is if it's, say, not a particularly bright display, just an ordinary, just less obvious display of the aurora, I would use a setting of the ISO around 2500, a shutter speed of around 10 seconds, and then the aperture on my lens, I can go down to lower f numbers. I normally go to around f2. However, if it's a very intense display of the aurora, I think my settings, I had tweaked them to around, I had an ISO, I think at one point of around 640. I think it came down to maybe slightly higher. And I was using a shutter speed of even between 2 and 5 seconds. So it can vary depending on the intensity of the aurora. And if your lens then doesn't permit you to set such a low f number, your aperture value, then you just need to adjust the other two settings, which is your shutter speed and your, excuse me, and your ISO, to give you the correct exposure, which means your image isn't too underexposed. Another setting on your camera then is called white balance, and white balance is normally either in one of the menus, or you may have a button on the back of your camera which says WB, or AWB, and that stands for white balance. And white balance changes how colors are represented in your photograph. So you normally would want to drop that number down a wee bit to around 3500. Natural daylight tends to be around 5200 to 5500. So you're making it a wee bit cooler, but it really enhances the colors of the aurora. And if you are comfortable and you know how to do it, and you have access to editing software, you can shoot in a different format called RAW, as opposed to a JPEG format. And it's just basically the format in which the images are captured on your memory card. And if your camera has noise reduction, I might turn that off just for the Northern Lights images. But if you don't have a camera, you can use your smartphone. Trying to think, have I covered already in this? No, I haven't done. So this will really depend on the quality of your shot will depend on the quality of your smartphone. If you have a very basic entry-level smartphone, the quality of your Northern Lights images aren't going to be as good as if you have one of the more high-end, high-spec types of smartphone. This image I took here, I think that was October time last year. I have a Huawei P30 Pro phone. It's just an old one I use, and I would shoot some video on it. But you can see it's done a pretty decent job of capturing the aurora. Now, it was quite strong that night, but still did a decent job with it. I know that probably haven't seen a lot of images that people capture. The Samsung mobiles are excellent for capturing Northern Lights images. So again, use a tripod with your smartphone to try and keep your camera steady. So if your phone has a pro mode, and that's most Android phones would tend to have a pro mode within the camera app, or if your phone doesn't have that or you shoot with an iPhone, you can use a separate app to allow you to shoot in pro mode. And pro mode means that you can adjust those same settings that you can adjust on a camera. So apps that you can use would be the likes of Lightroom, ProCam or Pro Camera to capture the photographs. Now, some of these you may need to pay for. Some are free, but to access some of the settings, you have to subscribe to them. So it's up to yourself just to go and do a wee bit of research as to which one's best for you. Same things applies if you're adjusting. If you have a pro mode, you can go in and adjust the shutter speed, and I normally put it to around 10 seconds. The ISO setting, which again you'll find in the pro mode, put it to maybe 1600 or slightly higher. And if your particular model of phone or the app allows you to set the aperture, then set it to a lower f number again. It may show as depth as instead of saying aperture, and put that to a lower f number, around maybe f 2.8 or lower if you have that. Then you can take a test shot and see how it turns out and adjust them. If it's too dark, then you need to let more light in, and that could be using a slower shutter speed or a higher ISO setting. And this is another image I took on the Huawei phone in October last year. So again, did a decent job of capturing the aurora. Again, use your timer setting, and that avoids any movement from you taking the photograph. So just use that 2 or 3 second timer setting. And then some Samsung mobiles, as I mentioned, have more sophisticated settings. The Ultra options have maybe that RAW mode that you can take photographs in RAW, and they have like an astrophotography mode. Or if your phone has a night mode, try that option as well. And that helps you get better photographs with your smartphone of the Northern Lights. And this, I just wanted to share this image. This is one of my students, which is one of the regulars in the weekly challenge, and Nicola captured this beautiful photograph here using her smartphone of the aurora, and I think that was possibly October last year. It was either May or October last year. So you can see just captured a lovely shot. It used to be tripod, I think, and this is just herself in the photo, and I'm not sure what her settings were, but turned out really well. So some final tips then. Think about your location. As I mentioned earlier, look for places where you don't have much light pollution. And then there are apps that you can use. So I will have my Aurora apps, but I also have an app on my phone, which is called Weather Radar. And it shows you the anticipated cloud coverage for like a couple of hours ahead in a particular location. It's not 100% accurate, but there's no point if I look and I think, right, well, I may go to the North Coast because I want to try and get a particular shot. But if I know that's going to be covered in cloud for the next 2-3 hours, unless I'm prepared to wait, then I'll not bother. I'll stay somewhere local. Or you can see where the cloud cover is going to be on the radar, and then adjust to where you might potentially go. Keep an eye on the Aurora, that Irish Aurora Chasers group on Facebook, and you can turn on the notifications that if John does put an alert out saying it's potentially going to happen, then at least you know you can be prepared. And then you can get your equipment ready. So have your batteries charged and memory cards ready, and make sure you have your tripod with you. Things that I always bring with me for nighttime photography would be hand warmers, or even like a heat pack or hot water bottle. And definitely you need your hat and gloves and a scarf as well. And if you're going to use one of those remote triggers we talked about, then don't forget to do that, and keep your phone charged as well, so you can keep up to date with what's happening. And this is just an image I wanted to share. I think I have a couple of images here at the end. It's one of my favorite photos that I took at Downhill Beach at the North Coast. And this was, I'm trying to remember, do I have a date on that? I don't think I do. I can't remember. It was definitely in 2024. I think it was possibly earlier in the year. And it was quite hard to get a photograph where I was in it. That was me in the photo. So I used my tripod, used a 10-second timer to allow me to sprint down the beach. The difficult thing was I was able to capture the aurora, but when you're trying to be in a photograph yourself, if you have no one with you, then it's trying to get you in focus as well as the night sky. So I took a few attempts, needless to say, but I was happy with this one. And the other thing is sometimes you go and the aurora, it's given it to appear, and if it doesn't appear, know that you can still take some nice astrophotography as well of the night sky. This is one of the giants in the giant trail that we have here and around the Sperrins, and this was up near the OM Dark Sky Observatory. So there are two places in Ireland that have dark sky status. One is down in Kerry, and the other one is up near Kildress, out here just outside Cookstown. So I'm very lucky to live at a reasonable distance from it. And Baymore, as in Beagh, more stone circles, and that area has been designated as dark sky status, which means there's limited light pollution, so you have a better chance for astrophotography or the Northern Lights images. So there we go.